Within this lecture, we are going to continue looking at common comma errors that arise in student writing. Specifically, we'll be examining how commas and non-essential elements function. Before we can begin examining how commas work with non-essential elements, we should first examine what is the difference between essential and non-essential elements. Essential elements provide information that is absolutely necessary to understand the sentence. Conversely, non-essential elements provide extra information that is not necessary to understand the meaning of the sentence. When we are dealing with a non-essential element, we can and should place commas on either side of that element. There are three types of non-essential elements. There are words, there are phrases, and there are clauses. Generally, when we have non-essential elements, these words, phrases, or clauses will be referring back to a noun or a pronoun. Therefore, non-essential elements generally either rename the noun or pronoun or describe the noun or pronoun. When we are trying to identify non-essential elements, there are a few aspects that can help us key in to whether we are dealing with a non-essential or an essential element. When we are dealing with words, there is no real hint to help us identify. However, when we are dealing with phrases, we should look for words that end in ing, ed, en, or t. Words that end in these letters immediately after a noun or pronoun might indicate that we are dealing with a non-essential phrase. Similarly, when we are dealing with clauses, we should look for the words who and which, as these two words will typically begin clauses that might be essential or non-essential. So how do we determine whether we're dealing with an essential or a non-essential element? We should consider the type of information that is provided, whether that information is broad or whether it is very specific. If the information is broader than the noun or pronoun it refers to or renames, the element will be non-essential. If it is non-essential, we will place commas on either side of the information. If the element is more specific than the noun or pronoun it modifies, it will be essential, and we will not put commas around it. Let's take a look at an example sentence. The 19th century inventor Thomas Edison developed the light bulb. Within this sentence, we can identify a noun, inventor. Immediately after inventor, we have Thomas Edison. As Thomas Edison is renaming inventor, we need to decide whether this is essential or non-essential to the sentence. So let's consider Thomas Edison in relation to the word inventor. Is Thomas Edison more specific or broader than the noun inventor? It appears that Thomas Edison is more specific than the broad term inventor. If we eliminate Thomas Edison from the sentence, the example reads, "The 19th century inventor developed the light bulb." Without Thomas Edison, we don't know which specific inventor we are talking about. Therefore, Thomas Edison will be essential for the sentence. Since Thomas Edison is essential, we cannot place commas around it and must merely reincorporate it into the sentence. The 19th century inventor, Thomas Edison, developed the light bulb. Let's look at an additional sentence that is similar to this example. Thomas Edison, the 19th century inventor, developed the light bulb. Within this sentence, we'll note that the primary noun is Thomas Edison. After Thomas Edison, we have the phrase, the 19th century inventor. As opposed to the first example, we now need to decide whether the 19th century inventor is essential or non-essential. Is this term broader or more specific than Thomas Edison? This information is broader than the very specific noun Thomas Edison. If we eliminate this phrase from the sentence, we have Thomas Edison developed the light bulb. This contains all the information necessary in order to understand the sentence. Therefore, the 19th century inventor is non-essential. If this term is non-essential, we should place commas around it before incorporating it back within the sentence. Thomas Edison, comma, the 19th century inventor, comma, developed the light bulb. These commas indicate that the 19th century inventor is non-essential and can be removed from the sentence without hampering the meaning. Let's take a look at another example. The plant growing next to the house is my favorite. Within this sentence, we'll note the noun plant. Immediately after plant, we have a word ending in ing. If we have a word that ends in ing immediately after a noun or pronoun, we may have an essential or non-essential element. This phrase begins with growing and ends with house. Therefore, we need to decide whether growing next to the house is essential or non-essential. Is this term broader or more specific than plant? Within this example, growing next to the house appears to be more specific. If we eliminate this phrase from the sentence, we have the plant is my favorite. However, we don't know which specific plant we are discussing, therefore growing next to the house would be considered essential. Since this phrase is essential, we will merely reincorporate it back into the sentence. The plant growing next to the house is my favorite. Let's look at this example. King Tutankhamun, who died at 19, had an amazing burial chamber. Here we'll note the noun King Tutankhamun, after which we have one of our signal words that indicates the potential for an essential or non-essential clause. This word is who. What is the clause immediately after who? The clause who died at 19 may be essential or non-essential. In order to identify which, let's determine whether it is broader or more specific than the term King Tutankhamun. Who died at 19 seems to be broader than the very specific noun King Tutankhamun. If we eliminate it from the sentence, we have King Tutankhamun had an amazing burial chamber. This sentence still contains all the necessary information to maintain its meaning. Therefore, who died at 19 would be considered non-essential. Since it is non-essential, we should place commas around the term and reincorporate it within the sentence. King Tutankhamun, comma, who died at 19, comma, had an amazing burial chamber. Let's examine one final sentence. The Capitol building, which was built in 1800, is located in Washington, D.C. Here we should note the noun Capitol building. Immediately after this noun, we have one of our signal phrases that indicates a clause. Which? Where does this clause end? This clause ranges from the word which to 1800. Which was built in 1800, therefore, has the potential to be essential or non-essential. Is this clause broader or more specific than the noun Capitol building? This information appears to be broader than the very specific noun Capitol building. If we eliminate this clause from the sentence, we have the Capitol building is located in Washington, D.C. This sentence retains all the necessary information in order for it to make sense. Therefore, which was built in 1800 is non-essential. We will then place commas around the term and reincorporate this clause back into the original sentence. The Capitol building, comma, which was built in 1800, comma, is located in Washington, D.C. Before we move on to some additional examples, let's review quickly what we have examined. Non-essential elements can be words, they can be phrases, and they can be clauses. These words, phrases, and clauses that are non-essential typically come after nouns or pronouns and rename or modify them. When we are examining words, phrases, and clauses, we can identify phrases in that they often end in ing, ed, en, and t. We can identify clauses in that they begin with the words who or which. Once we have identified something that might be a non-essential element, we then need to determine whether that information is broader or narrower than the original noun or pronoun. If the information is broader, it will be non-essential, and we will place commas around it. If the information is more specific, it will be essential, and we will not place commas around it. Before we end this lecture, let's take a look at a few additional examples. Stephen, who has always lived in Mitchell, recently lost his job. Let's identify any signal words within this sentence. We can hopefully identify the word who as a signal word introducing a clause. Try to identify where this clause ends. This clause would end at Mitchell. Who has always lived in Mitchell, then, has the potential to be an essential or non-essential element. Let's identify whether it is broader or more specific than the noun Stephen. This information appears to be broader than the very specific noun Stephen. If we eliminate this clause from the sentence, we have Stephen recently lost his job. This contains all the information for the sentence to retain its integrity. Therefore, who has always lived in Mitchell is non-essential. Since this clause is non-essential, we will place commas around it and we will reincorporate that into our original sentence. Stephen, comma, who has always lived in Mitchell, comma, recently lost his job. Let's take a look at another example. The child playing with the chuck is Jeffrey's son. Here we should note the ing at the end of playing, indicating that we may be dealing with an essential or non-essential phrase. Where does this phrase end? This phrase would end with truck. Therefore, we need to determine whether playing with the truck is essential or non-essential. Is playing with the truck broader or more specific than the word child? This phrase appears to be more specific. If we eliminate it from the sentence, the child is Jeffrey's, we don't know which specific child we are talking about. Therefore, playing with the truck is essential to retain the meaning of the sentence. Therefore, we would reincorporate it within the sentence with no commas. The child playing with the chuck is Jeffrey's son. The 16th century astronomer Copernicus developed the heliocentric model. Within this sentence, we should be able to identify the noun astronomer. Immediately after this noun, we have another noun, Copernicus. Let's determine whether Copernicus is essential or non-essential. Is Copernicus broader or more specific than the noun astronomer? Copernicus is much more specific than the vague noun astronomer. If we eliminate Copernicus from the sentence, we have the 16th century astronomer developed the heliocentric model. Without the name Copernicus, we are unsure which specific 16th century astronomer we are discussing. Therefore, Copernicus is essential and will be merely reincorporated within the sentence. The 16th century astronomer Copernicus developed the heliocentric model. Let's take a look at another example. Marianne developed the plan, which had been revised many times. Within this sentence, we'll note the noun plan, after which we'll note a signal word for a clause, which. Where does this clause end? This clause ends at the end of the sentence. Which had been revised many times is our entire clause. Let's now determine whether this clause is essential or non-essential. Is this information broader or more specific than the noun plan? This information appears to be broader. If we eliminate this from the sentence, Marianne developed the plan, we are not losing any essential information to convey this main idea. Therefore, which had been revised many times would be considered non-essential. Since this clause is non-essential, we'll need to separate it with punctuation marks. However, here you'll note that we only place one comma before which. This is because the sentence ends with the clause, and we have a period that works as our other punctuation mark. Therefore, we would incorporate this clause back within the sentence. Marianne developed a plan, comma, which had been revised many times. Let's take a look at one last example. The car parked across the street was not there yesterday. Within the sentence, we'll note the noun car, immediately after which we have a word that ends in ed, indicating that we are dealing with a potential non-essential or essential phrase. Where would this phrase end? This phrase would span from parked to street. So we need to determine whether parked across the street is essential or non-essential to this sentence. Is this information broader or more specific than the noun car? This information appears to be more specific. If we eliminate this phrase from the sentence, we have the car was not there yesterday. However, without parked across the street, we do not know which specific car we are discussing. Therefore, parked across the street would be essential. This phrase would then be merely reincorporated within the sentence. The car parked across the street was not there yesterday. Hopefully, after watching this lesson, you have a better idea of how to identify and fix errors with commas and non-essential elements.